All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. Okay, you guys, on the line, I've got the great Matthew Ho, and as you know, he was the great whistleblower from before the Afghan surge, tried to stop it, his very best he did back in 2009, and he's been a great anti-war guy ever since then. Former Marine and was State Department at the time. He's blowing the whistle. And here he is writing for antiwar.com. Boy, that makes me proud. This one's called What the First Week of War with Iran Could Look Like When Logic and Proportion Have Fallen Sloppy Dead is the subhead there. Welcome to the show, Matthew. How you doing, man?
Good, Scott. How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on.
Now, here's the thing. At the time we're recording this on Thursday in the afternoon, they haven't started the bombing campaign yet. However, there's been a couple of leaks, one to the NBC News, and I forgot the second one, but whatever. They both say the same thing, and we got the write-up at the top antiwar.com from Dave DeCamp today. I already talked with him about it. That the plan is they're going to hit pro-Iranian and or Iranian, they claim, targets in Iraq and I guess in Syria and in Yemen, and possibly hit Navy targets, although I don't know if they're going to go that far, but maybe they're going to hit some Navy targets in the Gulf. And then the plan is that and this is going to last at least a week or so or something, and that the Iraqi militias and the Iraqi government, they're going to sit there and take it. I don't know who they plan on bombing in Syria, but whoever they bomb in Syria and whoever they bomb in Yemen, they're all going to sit there and take it. And the Ayatollah, even if they hit his Navy, is going to know better than to escalate in response, because then things could get really ugly. And we all know that the Ayatollah doesn't want to fight. He knows how bad America could hurt his country if it came down to it. And we know that the Americans know how tough it would be to take on Iran. So it looks like this is almost a political game, right? Like when Trump was shooting missiles at Syria over fake sarin attacks. They're like, well, okay, Ayatollah, we're going to do this, and then you do that, and then we're going to leave it at that. And they're trying to, like, a little bit of ground rules ahead of time thing and hope that they can contain it like that. But I wonder how worried you are that maybe that could be a problem and get out of control.
Very worried, because at some point your luck runs out on that. At some point, something can be pushed too far, or the political pressures that are felt become such that you have the response, the tit for the tat, becomes such a thing that the tat that's in relation to the tit, so to speak, right, is of such a blow that then the political pressures inside inside the countries, whether it's the United States or Iran, require a response that takes you into a level of warfare that ostensibly everybody didn't want.
Right.
I think it's safe to say the Biden White House does not want a war with Iran. Right. I think it's safe to say, as you said, the Iranian government doesn't want a war with Iran. And I think they're all hoping that this looks like January 2020 again, where the United States kills Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians launch a bunch of missiles at Al-Assad Air Base, nobody gets killed, and everyone can then back off. That's the best case. And the concern, though, is that there's so many other variables in here. There's so many other groups involved. The political pressure on the White House by the Republicans and by some members of the Democratic Party, probably very quietly as well, because there is a contingent within the Democratic Party that, being led by the nose by AIPAC, is very, very much in favor of some type of regime change in Iran, right? So maybe there's that type of pressure going on as well. But the danger is that whatever Joe Biden does, if it's not enough, there's a political cost to him, right? So he's got to deal with not just Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton and the others going on Meet the Press and saying this guy's weak, he's getting our troops killed, he's not willing to stand up for these dead soldiers and their families. But you've got this presidential campaign where, Joe Biden is behind. And Donald Trump, the first thing that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth after 3 soldiers are killed in Jordan is, if I was president, that wouldn't have happened. And so does that type of political pressure make it so that, okay, what's being leaked about, we're just going to limit it to hitting these Iraqi groups that are allied with Iran in Iraq, and then we're gonna try and kill some Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps officers that are in Syria, and maybe we'll hit an Iranian frigate, and that'll be it. Is that going to be enough? Right? Or do they have to do it to such a level that, okay, this is greater than anything we've done before? But then does that then cause the Iranians to have a response, greater than, say, what their response to the Soleimani assassinations was, which I think we all were very relieved to see, that their response was so held back, that they were so, there's a lot of restraint in how the Iranians responded to that.
Yeah.
So, and then of course the fear is that if what the Americans do, whether in the initial strikes or secondary strikes, a response to Iran's response to our response, does that then start to put fear in the Iranians that, well, hang on, are the Americans serious? Everything we've heard for 45 years from the Americans about getting rid of us, about how we are the greatest threat to the civilized world, about the evils of the mullahs of Tehran, right? I mean, all that stuff, all the ghost of John McCain is singing Bomb, Bomb Iran. Does that start making the Iranians think that, okay, is this really it? Are they really going to go for it? We know what the White House is saying. We know what they kind of feel. But what matters is, what is the Iranian perception? And do they then go into one, survival mode, particularly if they feel that their political leadership is now in danger? But then also, two, are they getting to the point where they feel like, is this not just a political decapitation, but a military decapitation? Are they trying to knock out our ability to actually repel some type of very serious and regime change oriented military strike by the United States? So do we need to be one step ahead and, basically kind of use it or lose it and go full bore on this? And do we need to launch strikes at their air bases in Qatar and in UAE and Prince Sultan Air Base and in Saudi Arabia and so forth? And then you can see very quickly how this becomes this full-scale war that everybody is saying, no, we don't want. But, Scott, if we teleport back, we build that time machine and go back, 100 years to 1914, most of those folks were saying, we don't want this war. We don't want this war, even as there was all the precursors. I was just reminded of all the wars in the Balkans that occurred prior to 1914. I mean, so the analogy here, how analogous this is to, that's the danger we're at, that despite what everyone's saying about how they're going to control this and how it's going to be just this very well managed series of strikes that put the fear of God in the Iranians, and they'll cause their the militias that are allied with them to not step out of bounds any longer. And Joe Biden, this will shut Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton up. How many? You don't have to be an expert in military history to know that war is not controllable. That this is not something you can manage. That the inevitability of it getting out of control is very often what defines war. And so that's I think what a lot of us are very afraid of as we wait to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and what you're describing here with this spiral, this tit-for-tat thing, I mean, we're already halfway into it, right? This has been going on for months with American strikes back and forth with these Shiite militias in Iraq and in Syria. It's just that this was the first time they actually killed some guys. They had wounded quite a few in the past, and there have been some real near misses and this kind of thing. And
they had killed a couple of contractors going back a few years. They've killed about two or three American contractors, not in the last several months, but going back to, say, 2019 or so.
Yeah. In the previous iteration of this.
Right.
which was also instigated by the Israelis, by the way. Remember, they were doing strikes into Iraq, which was what helped kick that thing off. And
Yeah.
or was it into Syria? I think it was
Into
both.
Syria, but I mean, but I think the point is we can keep talking about this like this, Scott, right? In the sense of like, and then before that, and then before that.
Well,
and
that's
then
the
before
problem on
that.
both sides,
and
right?
eventually,
You identified it, man. This is to go back to Justin Raimondo's old theory of libertarian realism that all foreign policy is based in domestic politics.
right.
And so
That's right.
if Biden leaves this thing unfinished, well, that doesn't look good. But those same kind of incentives to one degree or another and with different wrinkles in them apply inside Iran as well. And we all know the Ayatollah Khamenei is in charge, but we don't know who all is nipping at his heels and to what degree, you know, his meekness overall and his attitude toward the United States, you know, could really undermine him and possibly weaken his government, especially in a time when, for example, if we have a week worth of airstrikes against Iran's closest allies in Iraq, America's closest allies in Iraq, by the way, well, other than the Kurds, but the same guys that you fought Iraq War II to put in power there back 10 years, right. 20 years ago. I almost said 10, back 20 years ago, and helped, not you, but the rest of them helped to defeat ISIS 10 years ago, 9.5. Those same guys, if they start bombing them, that could really change the incentive structure of domestic politics inside Iran. About, are you just going to let them get away with this? And for that matter, in Baghdad, that right. These are supposedly our friends, the Americans, and we have guys. We have what, 5,000 guys stationed, I think, almost entirely in Kurdistan. I don't know if we have any in Shiistan right now, in the Shiite parts of Iraq. But did anybody wonder what happens if the Americans left in Iraq get attacked by the Iraqi government and their allied, or even just the militias without the army, but even especially with the army? And do they really think they're immune from that? Because going back 20 years in Iraq War II, the leaders of the Supreme Islamic Council, who are now the government, and Muqtada al-Sadr, who's the most powerful Shiite leader outside of government, they had all promised that if you guys go to war with Iran, we'll kill you. You might be putting us in power, but that doesn't mean that we won't shoot you in the back. So don't try it, pal. So if they this would be the biggest bombing campaign against the Shiite government that W. Bush put in power there in 03, in 04 and 05. This whole time, there have been limited strikes against Kataib Hezbollah here, there, one in Baghdad. But they're talking about a real-ass bombing campaign against our Iraqi allies. So that could change everything over there.
You know, I'm right. You know, this conversation, not what you and I, but the general conversation about this policy, about the U.S. policy in the Middle East, and particularly, say, the Iraq policy. It's so convoluted. It's like, you know, watching kids go through a playground, right? You know, climbing through the tubes and over the bars and across the rings and, you know, contorting themselves to get through this kind of obstacle. It really, I mean, like there's no straight lines here at all. And there's also, just to get back to a point you were making earlier, there's such personal memory, such personal history, such personal interest in this for all of us, whether we realize it or not. I mean, one of my first memories is, you know, as a 6-7-year-old kid, is the hostage crisis in Iran. You know, and that the hostages, and I grew up in New York, and the hostages came back and from then to West Point. You know, that's where they brought the hostages to in 1980. And like, that wasn't far from my home. So like the big deal of how that was, and everyone's tying yellow ribbons around the trees. And then one of the next memories I have, you know, a few years later is the embassy, and then particularly the barracks bombing in Beirut in 1983, done by those evil Iranians. So, you know, my young mind, my 7-year-old, 10-year-old mind was just informed about how the Iranians are evil, right? And that's just, it's not like the script on that from our media has changed much, you know, or from our political leaders have changed much over the last 40 years or so. And the Iranians have the same type of cultural and historical memories and legacies, and even more so because we were the ones who kept the Shah in power, that police state. We're the ones who, it was Jimmy Carter who gave the thumbs up to the Iranians to launch that brutal, horrible 8-year war, and then sanctions and so forth and so on. All this impacts people. You can't, none of this is clinical. None of this is just academic. So, this idea that, is this the culminating point? At some point, this process has to reach its culmination.
Yeah.
And is it now?
Hey, you guys, did you know that I don't just write books, I publish them? Well, the Institute does, and I'm the director, so yeah. 13 of them now, including my 4. We published 5 more in 2023. Lori Calhoun and Tom Wood's books about the COVID regime, Joe Solis Mullen on the fake China threat, Jim Bovard's latest, Last Rites, and our managing editor Keith Knight's Domestic Imperialism. And we've got more great titles coming in 2024. Check them out at libertarianinstitute.org/books and help support our anti-government efforts at libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thank you. Hey, y'all, Scott here. Let me tell you about Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Who knew? Artificial bank credit expansion leads to price inflation and terribly distorted markets. If you've got any savings left at all, you need to protect them. You need to put some, at least, into precious metals. Well, Roberts & Roberts can set you up with the best deals on silver, gold, platinum, and palladium. And they've been doing this since 1977. Hey, if you just need some sound advice about sound money, they're there for you, too. Call Tim Fry and the guys at 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. Or check them out at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. You'll be glad you did. And by the way, I have to point out, it goes without saying, but it should go said, that noticeably you left out Al-Qaeda's entire war against the United States there, because that's not Iran.
That's right.
It was not Hezbollah what knocked our towers down or even killed the Khobar towers.
But you know what's interesting? I had never read John Kiriako's book until recently, and John wrote this book in 2009. He had and I didn't realize that book was that old. But when I was reading it, and there's a foreword from Bruce Rydell in it, it's like, well, why the heck is Bruce Rydell writing a foreword for John Kiriako? That's that point, 2009.
He's a bit of a hawk for people who don't know. Rydell he's good on Yemen, but he's been very hawkish. He recommended the surge in Afghanistan that you tried to stop, for example. Go ahead.
Right. But by 2009, I think, Scott, it was clear, it had been clear for many years, that Hezbollah did not do the Khobar Towers bombing, correct?
Yeah. And they try to say that it's Iranian-backed Saudi Hezbollah, which is, I guess, does exist. But it was so clear, and this is, Gareth Porter has like a 4 or 5 part story about this. Michael Scheuer, the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, also is absolutely certain about this. And in fact, there's a great piece by what's his name in the Village Voice, Nat Hentoff. I think it was, no, was it? I'm sorry, it wasn't Hentoff. I'm so sorry. It's about Rudy Giuliani and the terror sheik or something. It's about how Giuliani was doing private security services for Sheikh Al-Thani in Qatar. And how, if I had this right, it's been a long time since I read this, so I'm pretty sure in Qatar there. And then the Khobar Towers was just on the other side of the fence. And that was where they had launched the attack from. And that it was bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who had done it, and their guys who had done it. And that then Al-Thani had helped them escape when the FBI came hunting for them. Apparently they sent the Waco killers, the hostage rescue team, to grab them. And the Al-Thani made them wait overnight and let bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed get away. And they were actually apparently going to try to grab him for that. And I interviewed a CIA lady one time named Cynthia Storer. And she insisted to me that, well, it was Al-Qaeda and it was Iranian-backed Saudi Hezbollah, both working together, who did it. But she can't explain to me how she knows that, but she swears that is true. But Gareth Porter debunked that, I thought, quite thoroughly. And, there's also a Frontline, PBS Frontline, all about John O'Neill, the man who knew, I think it's called, he was the FBI head of counterterrorism.
Yeah.
And when they talk about the Khobar Towers, part of that, they talk about how the Saudis had spun up this whole tale and that Louis Freeh bought it. And that then on the plane on the way home, O'Neill told Louis Freeh that, come on, you don't believe what they're saying about all this Hezbollah stuff, right? They're blowing smoke up your ass, chief. And then Louis Freeh, who was like this Opus Dei, extremely conservative Catholic, pretended to be so offended at the use of the word ass that he wouldn't listen to John O'Neill about this weird Al-Qaeda stuff anymore. And if the Saudis wanted to blame it on the Iranians, then they blame it on the Iranians. But meanwhile, who was it that got killed? It was American airmen enforcing the no-fly zone.
Right.
So it was the most important thing in the world that the truth had been portrayed to the American people of what happened there and what was behind this. Right. That you have, forget Iran attacking from across the Gulf for no reason. This was the bin Ladenites attacking a very important direct and symbolic target for the very important reason of getting it through your dad's head then that, boy, we better get our troops out of Saudi Arabia. Where, I mean, hell, we can bomb Iraq from the Gulf. Why do we have to have bases in Saudi to bomb them? Just so the Air Force can share with the Navy on the bombing runs? Let's just have the Navy bomb them then, you know? And anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is that it shows, like, as you were just saying there, that you have people like Bruce Weidel who know what happened, and they still lie about it. They still blame Iran, even though you had, 18, 19 American service members, most of them kids killed, 19. Right? I mean, they're willing to, I mean, it's obsession with Iran. You go back to, is it 2017 that Michael Vickers wrote that op-ed in the Washington Post about how the U.S. missed the best chance to weaken Iran with the Syrian civil war. Vickers was he ran the Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict Department for the Pentagon under Obama. Mm-hmm. So he was the guy in charge of that war.
And was later, he was Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. So he got promoted.
Yeah. And so he writes this op-ed after the Obama administration's out in the Washington Post saying how the Syrian civil war, this was our best opportunity to get Iran, basically.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? We're going to, this 500,000 people killed there had nothing to do with Syria. It was about Iran. I mean, this obsession with Iran, and you see it too. I mean, Susan Collins, the senator from Maine, after January 6th, she writes this op-ed saying, I thought it was the Iranians who were attacking this building, right?
I mean, so where your head would have to be at to think that, Jesus.
So the obsession, right, with Iran, that has, I mean, so, and then you get to the next stage where, okay, who's making these decisions? And, well, okay, it's coming down to Jake Sullivan, most likely. Yeah. What's Jake Sullivan? Jake Sullivan's a politician. So he is not looking at this from a strategic point of view. He's looking at this from a political point of view. And politics always trumps strategic anyway. You got tactical, operational, strategic, political, right? Yeah. And so that's the concern. Like, these people saying, well, we do need to do a little more than we should because it'll make us look tougher, and there's going to have plenty of people within DC who agree with them because, again, this Iran obsession, this mania that exists. But your point, though, about what are these troops doing in Iraq and Syria, you had a great piece a few weeks ago, Scott, about how they're bait, how they're basically a tripwire. Absolutely. I mean, the ostensible reason for them being there is this counter-ISIS campaign. But what are they doing? They're fighting the guys who are, they're fighting the guys who fought and defeated ISIS.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, and so the whole thing is, there's some more, the other part. Well, why are they in Syria? Well, one of the things is, it stops this land bridge that connects Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Land bridge is what idiots call a road. I mean, right. But it was an obsessive term, that they used 10 years ago. But, this idea that we are going to stop the Iranians from coming across and connecting physically with their Syrian allies. I mean, this obsession with Iran. But the point being, too, is that they are bait. And those three service members getting killed in Jordan their deaths did exactly what many in Washington, D.C. want to have happen.
Yep.
Put the president in a position where he has to launch a major attack. It can't be a handful of cruise missiles. Heck, it can't even look what we've been doing in Yemen with 12 or 13 attacks. This has to involve B-52s and B-2s and B-1s. I mean, this has to be a real, so the point though about those troops is I get into this a little bit in my piece, is what happens if the Iranians, as we were discussing, get into a survival mode, a use it or lose it mentality, or their obsession with us, because they have their hawks, they have their hardliners as well. They've had their people who just not even an obsession, just 45 years of this, we've had enough. Now's the time to have it out with the Americans, like that type of motivation. And maybe a little bit more strategic thinking behind it. This is our way to force the Americans out of the region ultimately. And then some political things too. I mean, they have elections there as well. Nobody's going to get elected when their country is getting picked on, particularly by the Americans. I mean, we've had enough. Who's going to stand up against these guys? So the idea being they launch enough strikes against our air bases in the region, in all those Gulf monarchies, where our air power is not able to provide the support to those garrisons we have in Syria and Iraq. And those garrisons we have in Syria and Iraq, that's what they're dependent upon, just like our small combat outposts and FOBs and such that we had all throughout Afghanistan. That's one of the reasons why the Afghan Taliban wouldn't mass and attack those small outposts, because of our air power.
Right.
I mean, they don't want to get massacred. You group up together and you lump up together in a group, and the Apaches and the A-10s and the B-1s are going to come in.
Hey, let me ask you, man. I read that Hezbollah has tens of thousands of rockets and missiles, and then I just imagine that means Iran has hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles that can cross the Gulf there.
Yeah,
is that right?
Why wouldn't they? They've got enough that they're producing enough that they can give their surplus to Russia.
Do you have any special knowledge from when you were in the service of that they have at least X amount or anything like that you can tell us?
No, I don't know anything like that. But I would say just this: 45 years of the regime change pressure from the U.S. Again, the Iran-Iraq war, the assassinations, the sanctions, the bullying. I mean, the attacks. I mean, all those types of things. If people are just going to assume that the Iranians are not ready for a war with the U.S., I don't know what to tell you. I mean, they could be as incompetent as we are and not be as prepared as they should be.
Yeah.
But you want to put your money on that?
No.
So you have to go with the expectation that if Matt Hogue can think about this, right, you got to believe the Iranians who have fought and won wars. Right. I mean, when we killed Qasem Soleimani, we killed arguably the best general in the world for this century. Name me a more successful, more competent, more respected commander than Qasem Soleimani was throughout the entire world for the last 25 years.
Well,
we certainly don't have anyone who's going to make it into the top 10 of that list.
You have to admit that a lot of his success was because he had George Bush and Barack Obama serving under him and carrying out his orders in Iraq, especially,
Yeah, I mean, hey, if you got the American Air Force and the American, carrier-based jets, behind you, that's going to help. Yeah. But,
and look, I'm always, maybe longtime listeners to this show are sick of this by now or whatever, but I got to assume that there's new people all the time. And I think it's so important what we're doing, harping on all this Sunni-Shia stuff. I mean, I think people notice. We don't sit here and talk about, well, what are the differences between the Sunnis and the Shiites? Who cares, dude? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about America's actual enemies who shed American blood. They're the radical vanguard edge of the Sunni side of this thing. The bin Ladenites hate us because we're too close to their governments. Right. Meanwhile, our government doesn't really care about that. Never mind the people in New York, the innocent civilians on the planes and in New York. They don't even care about their own guys who were killed at the Pentagon, Matthew, because what they care about is they hate the Shiites more because, one, more than anything, that's what Israel demands. But two, also, like you're saying, they're still not over the revolution of 79 where they declared independence from us. And then you hear them talk about Iraq War II. They act like Iran killed 500 or 600 Americans in Iraq War II when they just mean Iraqi Shiites did. They're just lying that Iran was behind that, as I demonstrate in the book with a little bit of your help, in fact, citing you there. But meanwhile, It was the bin Ladenites who were the vanguard edge of the Sunni insurgency that killed 4,000 of our guys in Iraq War II. But they don't want to talk about that. They hate the Shiites more. Even though it was only because Petraeus attacked them that we were even fighting the Shiites at all in that stupid thing.
I know a guy who was tells a story about being, he's a captain, I guess, in Sadr City in the summer of 2003. And this cleric comes in, wants to talk to the commander of the region. And they shun him. They tell him to go home and we're not going to talk to you, and it's Muqtada al-Sadr. Right. I mean, like there's stories like that.
Yeah.
All of us have these stories, particularly.
I don't remember my source anymore, but there was one where it was like this cute little blonde cupcake daughter of a Republican donor who had been appointed to the provisional authority there, who was for some reason the aide to Viceroy Bremer. And he said to her, "Who's this Muqtada al-Sadr guy?" And she said, "Oh, he's just some minor cleric." In other words, I haven't bothered looking it up and I don't know, but I just heard his name a couple times. So I'm just going to go ahead and bluff and tell you that he's not a big deal when actually he's kind of the biggest deal out of anyone in the whole country. There's a reason they renamed Saddam City, Sadr City, the day the statue came down. You know what I mean? Come on.
And the inanity of this, it extends further because, right now there are also people in DC who are excited about the prospects of this war because this would stop Iranian support to Russia, right? So we've got to bomb Iran to hurt Russia. I mean, so you just have this type of thinking that is just, I'm struggling to find the right words here because it's ludicrous. I mean, this makes no sense. But again, you're getting into this is about the politics of it, which is what you led off with. But this desire for Iran, getting back to maybe say a discussion about PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, I mean, like that was the crown jewel, right? Was Iran. And why? Yeah. I mean, but then it goes back to this obsession about 1979. And it really is about, as an empire, you cannot be offended the way the Iranians offended us, disrespected us, and as they did in 1979. Yeah. I mean, and even though that is 45 years ago, it still matters because that's what a lot of the senior folks cut their teeth on. When Joe Biden was on the Foreign Relations Committee, he had been a senator for 5 years or so at that point, I guess, right? I mean, this stuff is just imbued in him. And of course, it just transfers down. You have, this idea that these people are acolytes. And certainly that's the case. That's the case. Man,
it is. It's so ridiculous, especially when, Ronald Reagan was able to do deals and sell the Ayatollah missiles just a few years later. In the game of real politics, you just work things out, whatever, no hard feelings, and then figure it out. You know what I mean? What are you going to do? Stay enemies forever? You don't have to. It's just a choice. But the problem is they're just big enough, probably just big enough to maintain their independence. And America's just not going to be friends with any country that they can't completely dominate and control, I guess they've kind of settled for influence in India. I don't think they totally pwn India. They're willing to deal with them, but only because they hate China more, right? Otherwise, we'd probably be picking a fight with the Indians just for being big enough to stay out from total American hegemony over their policy.
I mean, are there any monarchies that are not on our payroll that we don't sell weapons to, right?
Certainly not in the Middle
East. We like monarchies, right? We tend to like dictators. It's not very difficult. I've done this a number of times. Steven Semler, I don't know if you ever had Steven on your show. Steven's great. I'll send you his stuff. He does a lot of really good data sets and graphs and things like that. Just put out something yesterday about our weapons sales last year, which totaled $238 billion.
Yeah, I read it's the biggest export.
Yeah. Just as a point of reference, we export about $175 billion worth of agriculture products, right? Just so this,
a lot of that is imperial gun to their head, forcing them to buy American grain, and they would rather have their own.
Yeah. But so if you take that list of who we sell weapons to, who we send cash to, who we train, all that type of stuff, and you match it up with like an organization like what Freedom House says, Freedom House, the NGO that's, basically it's funded by the U.S. State Department, and people like Dick Cheney, and Richard Pearl sit on their board of directors. You know what I mean? So this is not like some organization that Scott or I are sending monthly $10 donations to. But if you match up all the countries that we sell weapons to with the list of countries that Freedom House, again, a State Department cutout, more or less, you find that 3 out of 4 of the countries that the United States sells, that are monarchies, that are dictatorships, that are military regimes, autocracies, whatever, 3 out of 4 of those, the U.S. sells weapons to. Right? We supply weapons to 75% of the world's dictators, basically. Yeah. And then when you get into human rights stuff, it's even worse.
Right.
So there's 12 countries in the world that have the death penalty for LGBTQ people. You know how many the U.S. sells weapons to?
I'm going to say 12.
10, close, 10.
Yeah.
Iran was the one outlier. Yeah. But until a couple of years ago, it was 11 because we were selling weapons to the Afghan government.
In the 1980s, Gene Kirkpatrick, who was a legit neoconservative from the Social Democrats USA and who became Reagan's UN ambassador, she wrote this important article saying, look, we back authoritarians against the totalitarians. They lean right. That's good enough for us. This is the Cold War, damn it, and we're up against the Soviet communists. And you know what? The Soviet communists are just about as bad as they could be. So if you need an excuse, that was the best one that you're ever going to come up with.
Right.
But now that they're gone, let me check my watch here. They've been gone for 33 years now.
Right.
Now that they're gone, how can you justify this? For a little bit of oil or a little bit of Israel or whatever it is, we have to keep a military dictatorship in charge in Egypt, holding ridiculous Saddam Hussein-like elections where the winner gets 98% and whatever with
and we don't get upset then when they give gold bars to one of our senators, not just any senator, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. They give the guy gold bars, right? Exactly. And we don't get upset with it. I mean, the whole thing is so farcical. But then we get back to the point of, well, if it was just that, it was just about scumbags like Menendez getting paid off to, give out information about the U.S. Embassy in Cairo and to help. What was that whole deal about? Help sell halal products or something like that. If that was it, okay, we can laugh about it. But the reality is these policies, the result of our empire, have now gotten this position where we are facing this potentially really catastrophic war with Iran.
And look, this whole thing is about Israel too. Look, we've said
nothing about that. We've said nothing in this conversation yet about the genocide that's occurring.
Well, that's the whole thing of this, right? Is what started off this current round of fighting in Iraq is America supporting Israel bombing the hell out of Gaza. In retaliation, the current round of fighting, of course, began on October the 7th when Hamas broke out. And killed a bunch of civilians, as I've seen with my own eyes, as well as a bunch of Israeli military guys. And then, yes, also quite apparently, and well reportedly, the Israeli government killed a lot of their own people as well. Right. I don't think anybody knows exact numbers. But anyway, that is what started this all off. And just in the larger sense of imperial power. And, we're talking about Field Marshal Fatah al-Sisi, the dictator of Egypt there. Without the Soviet Union, and who knows, we got nothing but Clintons and Bushes and Bidens and McCain's running things over here, and they're all very evil and whatever. But without the Soviet Union messing around over there, and without Israel and their needs, you would think that America could probably just deal with whoever's in charge in Egypt and it'd be fine. You know what I mean?
Well,
Islamic Jihad is not going to take over the place. When the Muslim Brotherhood won the election, they barely had any power for the short time that they were even in charge there. But it's really because of Israel that America must support the military dictatorship in Egypt, the kingdom in Jordan, and a big part of the rest of them around the region too. Obviously, oil has a lot to do with it, but the incentive structures are very skewed in favor of this little Jewish state that doesn't even have any oil. And I know people make a really big deal about the gas field offshore Gaza, but I think it's a small deal and not a big one.
Exactly. I don't think it's enough to, And the Israelis own that anyway. They own it more or less anyway. The Palestinians are going to put out oil rigs there and get the oil themselves. Israelis were going to allow that. Come on, I mean, Israelis were going to do whatever they wanted, regardless.
Right, and the field goes all the way up to like Cyprus and off the coast of Lebanon and whatever. So it's all going to be shared by a multinational, whatever that Israel, of course, will dominate.
The one thing I will say about Egypt, and I was reminded about this, and maybe I probably didn't know it, and I can't remember who I can't remember who wrote this, but when Nasser was in power, there were no American military bases in the Middle East, right? And like that type of thing of like, we have to have a dictator in charge. Otherwise, things aren't going to be so smooth for us. We can't have all these bases. One, there's the idea of having vassals and them being pliant and cooperative, right? Helping our policies, particularly Israel first policies. But then the other thing too is that like, how can we be an empire if we don't have these outposts? How are we going to export $240 billion in weapons if we don't have foreign militaries that are eagerly going to buy them up? Right? How are we going to have 800 military bases in the world if there are Nassers out there? Right? How do we have an empire with people who are going to oppose us, and be popular because there are strong nationalist figures who are representing a history of, resistance to occupation, and so that's what the empire hates. Anything that's an affront to it. Right. And we get back to, okay, why are they so obsessed with Iran? Going back to that, it's an affront to the empire. How dare they do this? They should know their place, kind of thing. Yeah. But here we are, with wondering what's is it taking so long for the United States to launch these attacks because we're getting our aerial refueling tankers in place, because we've got to move the B-52s to Diego Garcia, right? Or to wherever it is, right? I mean, like, is that the reason why it has been almost a week yet? Or are they just building, I think it's probably that, as opposed to we're building dramatic anticipation, for the moment, right?
Hey, y'all, I got a new coffee sponsor, Mundo's Artisan Coffee at mundosartisancoffee.com. When I wake up in the morning, I feel like my brain is all dried out. I need to pour a hot mug of rich, tasty coffee all over it to get it back working again, like 10W30 for the noggin. Though not necessary, it helps if the coffee tastes good. Well, Mundo's Artisan Coffee does taste good. They get the best beans from all around the world, and they don't burn them. Support the show and support your brain at mundosartisancoffee.com. Just click the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org.
Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up.
Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free. And then you'll never have to believe them again. I mean, I think you got to ask, how dug in is Kataib Hezbollah? Like, do they not just go home? These are militia fighters who are like, semi-professional adjuncts of the Iraqi army. Who says they're going to wait around with a giant red target on their head, bomb me here?
And that's a good point, because where does the Iraqi army end and where does Kataib Hezbollah begin? Yeah. I don't think we know.
And they're not going to bomb the Iraqi army, are they? You're going to talk about a final break with their policy of 2003 through today.
The thoughts too is that people have to remember about these groups that we're talking about in Iraq and Syria is they're very competent. They're very experienced. Again, these were the guys that
for some reason,
right. I mean, so the threat to these American bases is real. Yeah. Balad Air Base or El Assad Air Base could get overrun. And certainly all those small bases in Syria, we've got I don't know, like a dozen bases in Syria or something like that. You know, all these small little things. None of us had heard of Tower 22 before, a week
Yeah.
ago. I mean, so all these small little bases, again, that were relying upon American air power for
Speaking of
defense. But then,
Jordan, I mean, why do we have to always assume that it's only ever going to be the Shiites who are intervening on the side of the Palestinians here when we know that 100% of popular opinion in every single one of these countries is on the side of the Palestinians here?
that was my point. Exactly.
Oh, man,
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
If they could
Oh,
reach
no,
out and
no, no,
touch
no,
our
you're good.
guys in Jordan, why can't they reach out and touch the king of Jordan?
I mean, the idea of exactly that, of why, first of all, the other thing that provides security for these small bases is local security. So we've cut deals with the locals who are in charge. You've got local Iraqi army units, that kind of thing as well. And
That's how 3 of our Rangers got shot in the back training Al Qaeda there back in 2016.
That's exactly right. I mean, so those local groups there, those local power centers, they may very well say to themselves, you know what, America's time here is up. This is the end. One, for on a moral level, on a metaphysical level, on a level of where is my alliance lay? It is with the Palestinian people. My uncle and my aunt and my cousins were all killed by an American bomb back in 2007. I mean, like all this type of stuff swirls together, as well as then too, maybe just the hard, cold realities that are put in front of them, whether that's cash, whether it's going to be, hey, there's going to be 1,500 PMF troops here tomorrow. Maybe, all that. Okay, you know what? We're not going to defend the Americans tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing could very easily happen.
All right, so that's a good place to change the subject to one last subject here. Because, I have a very thorough imagination of how bad this could get if it really just becomes like the Ayatollah announces all bets off. If you believe in God, it's time to stand up to the Americans. Holy crap. Like we saw what happened in 2004 when the Ayatollah Sistani said that in Iraq. He said, I want every Shiite. He said, I want anyone who believes in Allah. Go outside, tell Bush you want one man, one vote. And then they did. And they got their one man, one vote. They own the Constitution. They own the whole government ever since that day. You know what I mean? That was it. The Ayatollah does that. Either Ayatollah does that and calls all Shiites to arms in the region. I could see how absolutely freaking out of control that could get. Like,
well, I mean,
God
I would
knows
say
what all. But I want to go the other way with it, which is, they get away with this tit-for-tat BS. Look, we know you didn't do the sarin hoax. That was Al Qaeda, but we're going to pretend to believe it and bomb you for an afternoon, and you're going to take it and not do anything, and we're going to... Because nobody really wants to tangle with America. That's a pretty big bully. He says he just wants to punch you one time. I don't know. So that's how they want to play it. Let's say they get away with that. And let's say that really the worst that happens in this whole thing is still just what's happening in Gaza. That this America and their Shiite nuisance problem stays exactly what it is. Ultimately, we don't go to Tehran. We don't go to Baghdad. Nobody's going back to Baghdad, only by air. But even then, maybe not, to such a degree. So I'm looking more, or I wonder how you see the long-term consequence. I guess we still don't know the extent of the permanent cleansing of Gaza. Who's going to be allowed to come home and to what end and with what reconstruction and all these things that are, whether they're going to be completely cleansed out of there or what. But I just keep thinking that, man, it's levels of violence so much lower than this and so much less well publicized than this is what caused our Al Qaeda problem before. I mean, It was Bill Clinton bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi, as we mentioned, like with the Khobar tower attack there. But it was also American support for Israel and Palestine and Lebanon in the 90s, which helped turn this whole Islamic Jihad, Egyptian Islamic Jihad and Azam group project thing into an anti-American thing.
Right. I mean, one of the hijackers, 9/11 hijackers, didn't have family that was killed by Israel and Lebanon, if I remember correctly. Or
I don't know that particular one, but I know that the main hijacker, Mohammed Atta, and his buddy Ramzi bin Al-Shib, who helped coordinate the thing, but who couldn't get into the country, that they both were inspired by Shimon Peres's Operation Grapes of Wrath when he invaded Lebanon in, I think it was August of 96 or July 96. And then including the Qana massacre where 106 women and children were killed in a UN shelter. But they're doing that every day, killing 106 women and children in a UN shelter. Man, that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday during this whole thing. So, and by the way, it was Naftali Bennett, just trivia. It was Naftali Bennett that called in the strike on that shelter that made it into bin Laden's declaration of war against the Americans. And that was what inspired Mohammed Atta. I want to go join this Saudi. Here's Egyptians. I love saying this because it's so ironical and important to me. You got Egyptian engineering students studying in Hamburg, Germany, answer a call to arms by a renegade Saudi sheikh hiding in Afghanistan in order to avenge the Lebanese killed by Israel with American money. And so the call to arms is to knock down our towers and kill our people for being involved in these atrocities that most Americans don't even know where Lebanon is at all. If you switch Lebanon and Israel on the map, they'd be like, whatever. You know, they don't know nothing about it. And yet they're held accountable because, of course, Bill Clinton was helping Israel do it, whether Americans knew that or not.
And that's probably what I was thinking of. I probably have my thought that I said this before about the hijackers.
No problem. And people can find that in The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright and in Perfect Soldiers by Terry McDermott.
Yeah, but your point though, Scott, about what comes from this, and maybe one of the reasons why we may be seeing this delay, besides practical reasons, of like we got to get the planes and everybody in position to bomb Iran, is maybe there are and sit in the White House hoping that the ceasefire deal comes through. Right. And so we've heard today about the possibility of this deal was presented to Hamas and it'd be 40-day ceasefire. There'd be 3 phases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, maybe that's the hope, is that we need to decouple this, because you're absolutely right. What you said earlier about this is a call to arms, and we've seen this. And this could this be, if you want it, we start getting our imaginations. Could this be the call to the arms? Could I think could this not just for the Shia or the Sunni, but could and I think Erdogan is a great example of this. You hear him talk, you see how he postures himself. You're telling me he doesn't want to be the next Salah ad-Din? Right? Is that the competition that's going to occur among Erdogan, the Ayatollah, MBS? Who's going to be the next Salah ad-Din? So like we can go down all kinds of pathways here that may seem very fanciful, but you know what? It's not that much of a stretch. It's not that much of a leap to see how many years to go back till we saw united Arab armies fighting against Israel, right? The precedent is there. And in U.S. policy for my entire life, the last time was 73, so I was born in 73. The U.S. policy for my entire life has been to prevent that from happening again. Right, to prevent that type of unity among the Muslims against the Israelis, and so the dangers of all this. But the more acute thing you were saying about what comes from this genocide, what's going to be the consequences? Whether it's stuff that we can very easily predict and say, okay, who wouldn't want revenge? Why is there not going to be revenge for this? Any one of us who was attacked and brutalized, murdered, humiliated in this manner, wouldn't we have some type of desire for revenge? Isn't this the basis of so many? We've got a whole people aren't familiar with the whole notion of the myth of redemptive violence. Yeah.
Hey, just look at how we acted over September 11th. One really damned bad attack on one day. Our government got 4 million people killed, probably directly killed 500,000 or more in that, and got 4 million killed.
So you have
turn the world upside down.
Yeah. Hey, you got to go. You got to go. If you grew up in the pop culture we grew up on, Scott, you got to go out and avenge Alderaan, right? You got to go blow up the Death Star. You're never going to end this problem unless you stamp it out, unless you destroy it. Let alone all the
which is exactly what the Americans say. They only understand one thing: force, and that's exactly what they say about us too.
And that's the danger. That's the danger. Let alone the emotional aspect of it. Of like, who am I if I don't avenge, if I don't do something about what happened, who am I? I'm going to live my life this way the rest of my life, not having stood up for my entire family that was slaughtered, and it's just not just the Palestinians. You're seeing this sentiment, of course, everything the Yemenis, the Ansar Allah, the Houthis are doing right now, and look how popular they are. I don't know how they were in control of 70% of the population of Yemen before all this, and they weren't the most popular political group there in Yemen.
They are now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not just in Yemen, throughout the region. There are people down in Chile and people in Thailand and people in Angola who are cheering Ansar Allah, the Houthis on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because they're standing up for this. They're standing up against
and the
empire
Al-Islah party,
and its genocide.
The Muslim Brotherhood Party, which is a right-wing Sunni party in the country who they've been fighting this whole time. Al-Islah has been backed by Saudi. It's like the one Muslim Brotherhood group that the Saudis like for whatever reason. And the UAE doesn't like them, but the Saudis do. And the Houthis have been fighting them for this whole 9-year war. And then now Al-Islah is like 3 cheers for the Houthis and rallying around them. So war is the health of the state for the Houthis over there getting involved, which is another problem, right? They have their own domestic political reasons for ratcheting up tensions for everyone in the region for their own benefit.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean,
I'm sorry, dude. I have to stop you because I'm looking at the time and I'm in a panic.
Oh, yeah.
I got to get interviewed in 1 minute here. I could talk to you for the rest of the afternoon. You're the best, dude. I love talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, Scott. Hey, man. Thanks
really
for what you're doing. Thanks everyone for listening.
Hell yeah. See you, man.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.